So I think that there is a real understanding. Yes, there are multiple powers, and yes, the United States is no longer in charge. I don't know what implication they take from that and how much Trump's actions are in some response to that. I think there are several points that are that do follow that we could trace. One, as I said, Trump is not interested in the Ukraine war at all, so he would like it to end. He's in no position to ask for more financial support for Ukraine in any event, so that's why the war will end one way or another. But he probably also understands we're not defeating Russia, and so the whole point is pretty useless to be having this war. That's a reflection of reality in this sense. But he take another implication of that. One implication is he'd like to he's happy to divide the spoils of Ukraine with Putin. You take these minerals, we'll take these minerals. So they're dividing up Ukraine. Ukraine is the absolute loser in this.
Like French and Britain used to do in the Middle East.
This is basically
repeat of it.
This is basically what Trump is doing or trying to do. I don't think it can work so crudely as Trump believes, but that's the level at which this is being done. He and Vladimir will divide Ukraine and will end the conflict and will respect each other on that. But then Trump is also asking, how can America regain its strength? And he comes up with multiple answers. One answer that he's absolutely dead serious about is recognizing that because of global warming, ironically, the northern route and the Arctic has been opened up, and the United States is not an Arctic country, other than a small stretch of Alaska. And so Trump absolutely believes that Canada needs to belong to the United States and Greenland needs to belong to the United States. That is not rhetoric. It's not a joke. It is obscene, but it is not a joke. And the reason that he wants it is that the Arctic has become a strategic part of the world because it's no longer an ice-bound wilderness. It's now going to be central for international trade and resource development. And so that's where that comes from. So that's a kind of limited imperialism. It's a Western Hemisphere imperialism that Trump is actually trying to invoke. Again, I think the U.S. probably will militarily occupy Greenland during his administration. That's an invasion of Europe. I bet that it will take place. I don't think the U.S. will occupy Canada, but I do think that with the 50,000 people of Greenland, the United States may just decide it's going to take Greenland, and that's that. It won't stand. It won't work for the longer term. It will be a disaster, but it could very well happen. So that's the one kind of response. Trump also, I'm sure, believes that the tariffs are necessary for America to restore its greatness in some sense. And probably what he has in mind is we don't produce enough steel and aluminum to build our arms industry and so forth, and we can't compete with China unless we restore basic heavy industry. So I think that is, he doesn't express it in a very clear way, and the tariff policy is an absurd way to approach this, and it's going to fail, but it's probably on his mind in the way you're saying, Ronnie, that that this is part of the rebuilding process for the U.S. The problem that I have with all of that is I've never seen more illiterate economic policy. It's not even policy. That's a grandiose term for what passes as a thought process day by day. We have no institution in the United States asking the question about industrial policy or strategy. None. We have no planning agency. We have no NRDC, NDRC. We have no economy ministry. We have no institutional process thinking about America's economic future, because this is not how it's done in the United States. The only industrial planning we have in the United States is the Pentagon, and that's to build, F-35s and so on. It's not to do infrastructure or economic revitalization. So what Trump is doing is complete improvisation. You cannot run a $30 trillion economy on improvisation, but that's literally what is happening right now in terms of government policy. We don't even have congressional hearings where ideas are discussed, where experts testify. We don't have white papers. We don't have green papers. We don't have any process of thinking right now. We have edicts from the White House. That's a very strange way to run a country. I think that there are a few points to say about the so-called rule-based order that are probably worth saying. I did a study last year with a colleague on comparing how countries do or do not abide by the UN principles and whether they vote with or against the majorities in the General Assembly, whether they join UN treaties or don't join UN treaties, and so forth. And we call this an index of alignment with the UN Charter. The United States ranked last in the world over the last 20 years. Last.
Correct.
It was, the U.S. has not ratified a major UN treaty for decades. In fact, the mere fact that it is a UN treaty leads the Senate to reject it, because there's a view that, well, if the rest of the world wants it, it must be against us. It's a kind of paranoia which predates Trump, but is very pervasive. We once had legislation to prevent discrimination against people with disabilities. The U.S. adopted this. It was one of the first or the first in the world. And then it went to the UN, and it became a UN treaty. When it became a UN treaty, the Senate refused to ratify it because it was a UN treaty. And so this is a absolutely pervasive, weird phenomenon. The United States votes least of all countries with the majority in the UN General Assembly. Part of that is that it votes with Israel against the whole world on issues of Palestinian rights. But it's more than that. The U.S. became the great champion against the developing country call for any kind of social justice. Every year, the UN votes a massive majority against the use of unilateral sanctions. Under international law, no one country is allowed to put on economic sanctions against other countries. Sanctions are reserved as a right for the UN, not for an individual country. But which country uses sanctions every day is the United States by presidential decree, not even by congressional action. So in this sense, the U.S. has, in my opinion, not been a leader of a rules-based order, the U.S. has been a leader of a U.S.-based order. Okay, you could say it had some advantages, it had some disadvantages, but the phrase rules-based order was never defined. Whose rules? Not the rules of the UN, certainly, not by any objective measure. This is not something new. This is what I was saying has been true for 30 years. Trump says publicly what is hypocritical privately. So Trump is stunning in saying, I don't care about rules. I don't care about treaties. I don't believe in any of this. But the U.S. behavior has been quietly to neglect all of this while professing to lead a rules-based order. So Trump is just making explicit what has been implicit for a long time. He's much worse, in my view, because who walks out of the World Health Organization or who walks out of the Paris Climate Agreement? It takes a lot of nerve, in my view, to do that. It's repudiating the world interest in the most explicit way. So our earlier governments didn't do that, but they also did not do anything positive to assist. When it came to the Paris Agreement, for example, the United States has expanded tremendously its supply of fossil fuels since 2015. We have never had legislation in the United States on climate change. Never. We had some tax cuts for renewable energy in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, but that was quite different from climate action. Congress will not vote climate action because of the corruption that I talked about before, because big oil is more powerful than renewable energy in the American political scene. So all of this is to say that I abhor the way that Trump behaves, but it's not so different in many ways from long-standing behavior. When it comes to Ukraine, that's a whole nother matter which we won't discuss at length, except I'll just repeat, I believe that the U.S. was the provocation. Ronnie said and explained, Russia didn't want NATO on its border any more than the United States wanted the Soviet Union in Cuba in 1962. And
Condi Rice has been saying it all along that NATO must expand to the east.
Exactly. And this was a very direct provocation. Look at how, by the way, if we want to talk about hypocrisy, the United States has military bases, of course, all over this region, and yet Hutchinson can't have a port in Panama. Okay, that's the double standard that gets us into a ridiculous amount of trouble, because under the U.S. mindset, the Western Hemisphere is ours, up to and including Greenland and Canada, by the way. But all the rest of the world has been America's playground to do as it sees fit. The Middle East, anywhere. NATO enlargement, anywhere until Trump at least saying no on that. But in East Asia, still, of course, anywhere. My own view, by the way, I don't know whether it would be subscribed to here or not, but my own view, quite strongly, is the United States should stop unilaterally any armaments to Taiwan, period. And I say to do that for the safety of Taiwan. There's nothing more dangerous for Taiwan than sending Taiwan armaments, in my view. This is the same as happened with Ukraine. If you wanted to be friends with Ukraine, keep NATO away. And there's a famous adage which people know, which I and others repeat almost daily, Henry Kissinger's adage that to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. And Taiwan should be very careful. They're not careful. But this is the kind of thing where the double standard. Imagine if China were arming the Upper West Side of New York because we're against Trump. It would not go down well. And I think we should be very cognizant of this risk.